auditors. Let's quickly look at the differences between internal and external audits. Some similarities, more like some differences. We are trying to compare an internal audit with that of an external audit. While sharing some characteristics, internal and external audits have a very different objectives. So let's look at this as we look forward some of those differences. Number one, in terms of reporting line, who does the external audit report to? Who does the internal audit report to? The external auditors report to the shareholders or members who are outside the organization's governance structure. That's the external users. And the internal audits department usually report to the board and senior management who are within the organization's governance structure. And as such, it can actually pose some objectivity threats because more like you reporting to someone that is your senior in the organization. They can actually dictate what you should put in your report. That's why enough safeguards should be put in place for the internal auditor, and that's part of the thing. The independence of the auditor, of an internal auditor, that's part of the thing. An external auditor should actually consider, apart from it, even their competence or qualification, they should actually consider the independent, how the extent to which they are granted independence to carry out their work before you can actually rely on the work of the internal auditor. Some of the objectives. What's the objective of external audits? The objective of external audits is to add credibility and reliability to financial reports from the organization to its stakeholders by giving opinion on the reports. We spoke about the objective of external report the other time, so of external audit. So there's no need to actually do the type of reports that the auditor is actually giving and why objective for actually giving that particular report or expressing a particular opinion. Now, when we look at the internal audits, the objective of an internal audit differs from that of the external audit. And the objective of the internal audit is to evaluate and improve the effectiveness of governance, risk management, and control processes. And this actually provides members of the board and senior management with assurance that helps them fulfill their duties to the organization and its stakeholders. What about the coverage of the reports of an external audit and that of an internal audit? Now, the coverage of the financial reports of the external audits and their financial reports covers financial reporting risk. They have financial reports and the financial reporting risk, while that of the internal audit covers all categories of risk, their management, including reporting on them. Now, what about the responsibility for improvement for external audits? There's none. However, there's a duty to report problem. When you discover a problem in external audits, you have to report them. That's why there's a particular column, a particular segment of our audit reports that we actually talk about some particular things that we have observed during our audit engagement, and as such, we have to bring it to the knowledge of the users of the financial statement. Now, for the internal audit, improvement is fundamental to the purpose of internal audit, but it is done by advising, coaching, and facilitating in order not to undermine the responsibility of management. Now, quickly, having done that, let's quickly examine the peculiarity of public sector audits. The peculiarity of public sector audits. Now, when we talk about the peculiarity of public sector audits, there are two things that actually warranted audits in public sector. Majorly, talking about how can accountability, and transparency. Accountability and transparency. Majorly, that's what has actually brought about public sector audit, as we have seen that accountability and transparency has over the years been recognized as an instrument of reduction of corruption at all levels of the public sector. Yeah, if there's a lack of transparency and accountability in the public sector, it can actually present a major risk to the efficiency of the capital markets. It can actually provide a major risk to the efficiency of the financial stability, long-term economic sustainability, even economic growth and development. And as such, we have to actually introduce public sector audit. Now, when we talk about public sector audits, um, public sector success is actually measured primarily by its ability to deliver service successfully and carry out programs in an equitable and appropriate manner, unlike the private sector where generation of profit and all. So when we look at this, public sector audit activities should have the authority and the competence to actually evaluate financial and program compliance, their effectiveness, economy, and efficiency. You still remember the value for money audit? I know, more like we picking it from there. And moreover, auditors also must protect the core values of the public sector as it serves all citizens. Yeah, when it comes to public sector audits, you are not only even responsible, more like you are not only responsible to a particular stakeholder. You are responsible to the public, not even like the private sector, more like you reporting to the shareholders. But yeah, you are trying to report to a large range of stakeholders. And auditors perform the following roles. Let's quickly look at it when actually carrying out an a public sector audit. Number one, let's consider the oversight. The oversight The public sector auditors perform their oversight function by actually evaluating whether public sector entities are doing what they are supposed to do. Yeah, you are using the fund of taxpayers. Are you doing the right thing? What you have actually intended to do? Are you actually carrying? They are putting them on their foot. As such, that's what we are talking about when we come to oversight function. And they are actually looking at spending funds for the intended purpose and actually complying with rules and regulations. And public sector auditors monitor the effectiveness of management's control structure as well as to detect and deter misuse. That's a major major one in public sector, misappropriation of funds. So misuse of power, looking at the misuse of the power and resources entrusted to government officials. That's one area that in which they carry out their function or their roles. And that one is detection. Detection. Now, the public sector auditors are also intended to identify inappropriate, inefficient, illegal, fraudulent acts that has taken place already and to gather facts and evidence to support disciplinary actions. Yeah. So they have to actually look for, is there any illegal or if fraudulent stuffs carrying out that has been carried out in the public sector? Are they inappropriate? Um, they are actually going to actually look for them and detect them, then actually put them through some provide some evidence to support disciplinary actions. The next one is deterrence. Deterrence. After detention, the next one is a deterrence, and the auditors also perform deterrence function, which is intended to identify and reduce the conditions that allow corruption. Yeah, if we are saying that we actually want to get the cow by its neck, then we should try to provide a method in which it won't happen at all. We are trying to deter it from happening. But if we actually fail to deter it, then we can try to detect it. Then that's what we are just looking at there. Now, the last one is insights. Auditors provide insights to assist those at the helm of affairs in the country by assessing programs and policies that are working or not. Like we're just giving them an advice, consulting, more like a consulting services, or assisting in terms of opinion, or management, or probably rendering, more like it's the advice. We are giving them insights into um, providing assistance to those at the helm of affairs in the country, whereby we assess the programs and policies that are working and that which are not working. Now, let's talk about that concept here, the expectation gap in audits. Expectation gap in audits. In recent times, expectation gap in audits has actually led to a lot of auditors' liability, and this concept is not actually new. When we talk about expectation gap, I'm very sure we are quite familiar with it. And when we talk about expectation gap, this is the difference between what? This is the difference between what? Difference between what the general public thinks auditor and what the auditor should do, and what the general public would like auditors to do. Yeah, the expectation gap in audits is actually a topic that attracts attention over time, and it broadly measures the public concern about audit. Since we have said that, oh, this is what this is what the public wants auditors to do, and this is what is required by probably the ISA for the auditors to do. Okay, let's move on. Now, historically, some in the profession might have portrayed the gap as being due to public lack of understanding rather than being a legitimate concern. Yeah, more like people see expectation gap coming up as a result of the public not being educated on what the auditor is required to do by necessary, probably legal or regulatory bodies. So I don't think this is actually true. Yeah, even though there might be a gap in knowledge, it actually doesn't cancel the call for auditors to do more or better. Yeah, they are not enlightened, but this public, they know what they want, and as such, it should call for the auditors to evaluate what the public are actually crying for, and they should try and do better. Now, this gap doesn't seem to have narrowed since the term was first used, and the persistence of the expectation gap reflects, in part, the fact that public expectations of audits can grow in line with what auditors can accomplish. While it's common to refer to the expectation gap, in truth, there are several gaps. Yeah, when we refer to expectation gap, we can, in the real sense of it, there are a lot of expectation gaps, and a new approach to addressing the expectation gap can be suggested, and it's proposed thinking about expectation gap as having three components. I want us to look at it from this angle as having three components, which are the knowledge gap. We have the knowledge gap, we have the performance gap, and lastly we have the evolution gap. Then let's look at each of these. When we talk about it, I'll provide a diagram just to explain this, but before we actually go into that, let's look at some things together, some examples. Now, let's consider knowledge gap. Knowledge gap. When we look at knowledge gap, a wide knowledge gap can make it actually harder to understand the true evolution gap. Now, when we talk about knowledge gap, let's say, for example, if they are aware of policies that are already in place, the performance gap focuses, before we even talk about the performance gap, let's consider the expectation gap once again. Like, for example, you are not aware of the policies in place, or probably principles and regulations. The general public are not aware of it, and as such, they don't know what the auditor is actually expected to do. They just know, they just like more like, oh, auditor is going there to detect fraud, but in the real sense of it, the legal or probably regulatory bodies major aim is not to go and detect fraud. They are just going there to express an opinion as regards the truth and fairness. So more like there's a knowledge gap because they don't know what the auditor is required to do. Now, a performance gap actually focuses on areas where auditors do not do what the auditing standard or regulation require. And this usually leads to auditors' liability in most cases because of these particular standards or regulations have told the auditor to do this, but the auditor have not done this, probably is not aware. So the auditor have not done what the standard or probably the regulations have actually required, and as such a performance gap could actually occur. And this could be because of insufficient focus on the audit quality or differences in interpretation. Yeah, the audit quality, the way you have planned the audit, your strategy and all could actually influence it. And that one is when there's no proper interpretation of the audit standard. Yeah, this could be on the part of the practitioner, it could also be on the part of the regulators, as the case may be. Now let's look at it, how it can actually form. Look at it there. We said the knowledge gap. Look at pointing towards the left, we have what the public thinks auditors should do. This is what they think the auditor should do, right? And look at it here. In the middle of this, we have what auditors have actually done. Yes. Now, look at the performance gap also. We now have what auditors are supposed to do. This is what the auditors are supposed to do. Look at what the auditors have actually done. And I saw there's a performance gap. What auditors have actually done and what the public thinks auditors should do, there's a gap between these two also. Now, in the future, looking at the future, there should be an evolution gap, more like the auditor trying to satisfy here. And as such, what auditors are required to do will not be here. Have you seen it? So now, what the public wants auditors to actually do, they keep coming back for this, but the standards, or probably the regulatory standards and all, or probably local or statutory um principles and all regulations, I've told the auditors to stay here. But what the public wants auditors to do keeps coming here, and so there's still a gap here. So that's an evolution gap. But the major thing is, let's look at how we can actually address the expectation gap in audits. There's actually an urgent need for audits to evolve, like we have seen there, and just to listen to the public's legitimate concern about the audit. And this, it is vital to ensure that the knowledge and performance gap components are addressed as part of probably addressing the evolution of the audit profession. Yeah, if we can actually address it, then we can actually address the evolution of the audit profession. Now, closing the expectation gap in audit will support a more constructive discussion about how audits can evolve to meet society's expectation of it. Yeah, if we want to close this expectation gap, then we have to engage ourselves in some constructive decision on how we can actually meet society's expectation of the audit. And as such, you will discover that some gap will not actually exist. Now, we can call upon all stakeholders connected to the audit profession, including the professionals, the accountancy bodies, the audit firm, the regulators. Are they not the one coming up with what we should do? And so we should call upon all the stakeholders, the journalists, the politicians, just to contribute towards the reducing the expectation gap. So lastly, I want us to actually consider reasonableness gap. I wouldn't fail to talk about this. There's also an audit gap, reasonableness gap, as it relates to audit. The reasonableness gap is actually a gap between what the society expects auditors to achieve and what they can reasonably be expected to accomplish. Can you see that the word here is different? Like reasonably, what can they actually expect? More like the society is mounting so much pressure on the auditor. So we are looking at, let's even look at if I thought they want to actually fulfill the society's expectation. What can they reasonably accomplish, or what are they reasonably expected to accomplish that they don't even accomplish? This is what they should be able to accomplish. So that's what we are talking about, and as such, it has brought us to the end of this particular session. It's been an awesome time with us. Thank you for staying with me, and that's a bye.